The hidden wound beneath the silenced self is this. You learned that safety could be found through disappearance. At the center of the child who learned to be quiet lives an unspoken contract. This explores how silence became protection, how self-erasure became safety, and how that same strategy now costs intimacy, identity, and the feeling of being fully alive. This isn't about shyness, it's about adaptation under threat. You remember the sound of your own breath. You memorized which footsteps meant danger, which tones meant someone was about to explode. So you learned to be quiet. You learned to sit still, to read the room before speaking. You learned that your voice could change the temperature of a space. So you adapted. You stopped asking. You stopped interrupting. Not because you didn't have needs. And at first, it worked. Being quiet kept you out of trouble. It kept you invisible. But here is the paradox shaping your adult life now. The silence that protected you as a child now becomes the prison you carry. What once kept the peace now keeps you unseen. What once prevented conflict now prevents intimacy. This is not a story of weakness. Children who learn to be quiet don't disappear. They become observers. They become self-contained. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking the most dangerous question. What would happen if I spoke? Psychologically, silence is not the absence of sound. When a child grows up in an environment where expression is punished, ignored, or destabilizing, the nervous system adapts automatically. The first adaptation is hypervigilance. The quiet child becomes hyper-attuned, tracking moods, monitoring facial micro-expressions, noticing tone shifts that others miss. Not because they're naturally sensitive, the body learns, stay still, stay small, stay ready. The second adaptation comes from emotional neglect, not from what happened, but from what didn't. No one asked how you felt. No one noticed when you went silent. No one made space for your inner world. To a child, that absence becomes a belief. My emotions are inconvenient. My voice makes things worse. My silence keeps me safe. These beliefs become internal architecture, shaping identity, relationships, and self-worth. Then comes the attachment adaptation. Closeness becomes risky. Connection becomes something to manage, not to experience. You may crave intimacy, but only if it doesn't require too much of you. You may want to be known, but not fully seen. Silence becomes a boundary. Distance becomes control. Neuroscientifically, the brain's default mode, the place where identity forms, becomes externally oriented. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" the mind asks, "How do I stay safe?" The self becomes a background process. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." But there is another burden, quieter, heavier, the unlived voice of the self. You grieve something you were never allowed to fully have, not because it was taken, but because it was never welcomed. This is invisible grief. There was no moment of loss, no single event to point to, just a slow conditioning. Be careful. Be quiet. Don't make it worse. You sacrificed authenticity for stability, again and again and again. Underneath it all lives a simple, devastating fear. The fear that your voice will cause harm. So life becomes complicated. You rehearse conversations in your head. You soften your opinions before speaking. You apologize before you talk. Even joy feels dangerous because joy takes space, and space was never neutral. Rilke warned that what is not lived consciously returns as unrest. This is that unrest. These patterns don't disappear with age, they evolve. In relationships, you become the listener, the emotional container, the one who understands everyone but is rarely understood. You share selectively. You downplay needs. You stay silent in conflict and resent it later. In your career, you work hard but avoid visibility. You wait to be noticed instead of claiming space. You struggle with self-advocacy. You confuse competence with safety. In your sense of worth, you feel valuable only when you're low-maintenance, easy, non-disruptive. Praise feels uncomfortable. Being seen feels exposing. In boundaries, you hesitate to say no. You disappear instead of confronting. Emotionally, you intellectualize feelings. You stay calm under pressure, then collapse in private. Your body carries what your voice never released. In identity, you know what others need, you know how to adapt, but you struggle to answer the simplest question: what do I want? These are not personality traits, they are coping mechanisms. And healing begins not by changing them, but by witnessing them. Not by asking, what's wrong with me, but what did this silence once protect me from? Healing doesn't mean becoming louder, it means becoming safer inside. It begins with reparenting, offering yourself the permission, attunement, and response you never received. Practicing speaking in low-risk spaces, naming needs without justification, allowing your voice to exist without consequence. It continues with shadow work, meeting the part of you that learned to disappear. Not to eliminate it, but to thank it. It kept you alive. Now it needs an update. Healing also happens in the body, because silence wasn't a thought, it was a survival strategy. Through breath, through rest, through learning that stillness is no longer dangerous, you begin choosing softness over survival. You are not broken, you are over-adapted. And as Jung said, I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. And what you can choose now is this: to speak without rehearsing, to take up space without apology, to let your voice be imperfect and still valid. The goal is not to be fixed, the goal is to become whole. If this gave language to something you lived in silence, share it. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally letting yourself be heard. And that is where healing begins.